Going to kick off with a technical briefing right now from David Berger, who's the CTO for Integra and the GLBC. And then after David Berger, David Fisher is going to talk about the idea of being a blockchain-enabled law firm or legal department. We're going to break for about an hour from roughly 11:30 to 12:30. We'll start again at 12:30, and in the afternoon we'll have 12 or 14 presentations and announcements and demos and that sort of thing about blockchain. Okay, so thanks very much for being here. Feel free to get up and get coffee and refreshments as you need them. And David, over to you.
Well, we were supposed to have a projector, so if everyone wants to just gather around my laptop. Well, since I won't be presenting from a slide deck, I'll just open things up a little bit more. If you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and I can cover some more things on kind of an audience vote. Basically, when we started a couple of years ago, and when I joined a year ago, blockchain was really in flux. It still is. You know, if you get good at working with a certain technology, whether it's Ethereum or HyperLedger or one of the up-and-coming blockchains, by the time you get your environment set up and train up your developers and get your use cases done, odds are things will work completely differently. So we had to take some guesses about what we thought was the best technological course and let the blockchain consortium form and have the technical committees come together and get feedback from all of the members. And honestly, I had hoped that this would happen a little bit sooner, but it's okay. We're up and formed now. The technical committee has been formed, and I was just speaking with one of the other members, Brad, about some of the details. So I'm going to present a lot of our best guesses about the best technological course, and a number of the GLBC members, including a bunch that will be showing demos, net documents, Serve Manager, among others, have actually done proof of concept. So we've done a lot of tweaking and modification of what Integra is providing for feedback to meet the requirements, but we're hoping that as more and more members embark on their proof of concepts, that we'll get more and more feedback. So we have chosen HyperLedger Fabric to be the initial blockchain, and one of the reasons we did that is we were absolutely convinced that the API had to be brutally simple to use. So as a matter of fact, I had this really clever slide saying the #1 rule in getting people to adopt blockchain is don't talk about blockchain, and you would have all laughed. A Fight Club reference if that wasn't obvious. So my point being that that since the underlying technology, the DLTs, the blockchains behind what's going on, or again, I said is in flux, we thought the best thing to do would be to stick with a brutally simple API layer. So in other words, use the same standard programming technique that you're using in any software as a service, any basic cloud architecture, or the majority of ones. And if developers were interacting with the blockchain through that layer, they could use the tools they're familiar with, the design patterns that are well established, and not worry too much about blockchain itself, other than understanding that it's immutable and it's synced and it's shared. I mean, basically, you know, when I'm describing it to non-technical people, I basically say, pretend you have a Google Doc sitting behind it, and once you enter data into a cell, it couldn't be changed, and you know, you could only the world could read the spreadsheet, and the ownership of the Google account was controlled by a group of really trustworthy companies like Thomson Reuters and American Express and the top law firms in the world. And you know, you guys know about the consortium, so I don't need to describe that. So what we decided is to, as I said, to focus on a few foundational services, establishing a common identity system, or to get geeky, I call it foreign key as a service. Proof of existence, so basically taking any document or any digital data and hashing the data and creating the hash, and we'll be going into much more detail about exactly what that means and why we chose just to use hashes, and some stuff with key registry systems. And again, some of the demos, there'll be a Contract Express integration demo coming up that shows a lot of this net documents, has stuff. So we chose HyperLedger Fabric because it was really the blockchain platform that was primed and ready, but we'll be announcing a bunch of things around the fact that Microsoft has kind of leapfrogged ahead of some of its competitors, and they're offering some Ethereum-based stuff in the Azure cloud that we think is ready for prime time as of they made their big push August 7th in some blog releases. So we'll be talking a lot about that. So where we stand, there is a production-ready version of the Integra ledger up on the IBM blockchain platform. So that's been it's been available on the live network. We don't publicize it too much, but again, a number of the consortium members are actually already using the live platform. We have a test net up to deal with the newer version of HyperLedger that got around a lot of the issues I had with IBM blockchain platform initially, but we're going to be spinning up some of the alternate blockchains, and you know, one of the things that I throw out a request to the technical members of the consortium is we would really like to set up a group to talk about alternate. Instead of calling them blockchains, we need to call them distributed ledgers, because there's some really cool stuff like HashCraf is getting 900,000 transactions a second. They're private, but they just got 100 million in funding, so I'd love to see them involved. And we've spoken with the R-Chain folks, we've spoken with, you know, I think Big Chain DB is really cool. So I would really love to see a separate group stand up at the consortium to really look at the alternate ledgers. So where we stand really, as I said, is I've made my best guesses about hitting the Integra ledger, and I was going to walk through the API. Honestly, it takes an average of 2 phone calls for me and a developer to get it going. The record integration was about 40 minutes. The Serve Manager guys, I mean, they thought about it for a couple of weeks, but from the time we sat down and I went over the API, 40 minutes later, they had a pretty solid proof of concept. You know, a couple, 40 minutes, a couple of weeks. So I think we did a pretty good job, but again, once we start to see hundreds of people hit it, and you know, certainly, hopefully most members of the consortium who have representatives here, as soon as we start in helping them, or if they do their proof of concepts, we'll be wrapping things up. So, you know, that's my general overview. As I said, since I don't have the deck, I'd really like to open it up to any sort of questions or discuss anything anyone in the audience would like to.
Nothing too heavy, it's a very easy one. Since we didn't have a presentation, could we possibly have all the registrars get a copy of that by email?
Sure. Yeah, I'll send out not only the presentation I had, but I've been putting together a bunch of resources that I plan on making available on the the consortium websites, but there's some really great great articles about blockchain and the technology in particular. For example, the August 7th blog from Microsoft, if you're, if you're really, really interested in Ethereum and what's happening with that, it's really a great article.
Hey, David, the initial API has this ability to register a public key associated with an identity, and it's pretty open at this point. But has any thought been given, or has your team been considering how you might integrate that ability with different types of identities, either blockchain-based identities like Sovereign Foundation, or other types of electronic identities?
So, by the way, that's Brad Clements. Brad is responsible for some of the most significant integration done to date with NetDocuments, and he is a member of the GLBC technical committee. So we wanted to keep an identity system open. So one of the Integra advisors was one of the founders of the CU Ledger, the credit union ledger. And they introduced us to the Sovereign guys very early on. So one of the things that attracted us to HyperLedger initially, and I'll actually explain what HyperLedger is and the whole relationship after I answer this, because it's kind of interesting. One of the goals of HyperLedger is any blockchain project within the HyperLedger Foundation would be interoperable with everything else. So the Sovereign guys ended up donating their blockchain, or at least a version of their blockchain, and it became Project Indy. So we were really excited and expected Project Indy to get integrated very early on. And the main competitor to Indy, they're like 35, or there were at the time last I looked at about 35 major attempts, Uport being the big Ethereum one. So we were really excited about possibly using Indy. Honestly, Indy really felt more like it was a publicity stunt where they donated the code, and there was very little work. There was very little stuff going on GitHub, and even the documentation basically said, we didn't have time to, literally said, we don't have time to do documentation, go to the Sovereign Foundation. So it was on my list. I thought we would get back to them. I noticed last week that about 17 days ago there's major activity. So I think that it's time to take a real close look at Indy in particular, but some of the other identities. So sure. So I'm just gonna. How many people in the audience actually could tell me what the difference between HyperLedger and IBM's role in Fabric and the Linux Foundation? Does everyone know this? Because it's a little bit confusing.
No.
Okay. So IBM, a bunch of companies were working on their own blockchain technologies, and kind of in the same way, Integra realized that blockchain doesn't work for an individual company. It's a network technology. So a lot of the efforts were open sourced. So IBM was doing some really good stuff with Ethereum is cool, although it has serious problems with speed and cost, and it's an open network. And our conclusion was that no law firm or major corporation is going to allow their data to be protected by some random hacker in North Korea. So you really need a separate type of blockchain, private blockchains or permission blockchains, and that's just not what Ethereum is good for. So there were a number of attempts at permission blockchain, and Quorum was an attempt to put permissioning on top of Ethereum. And don't get me started, they have their issues. They're not quite dead yet, but they got to get their act together. So IBM really had the best tech, probably, and they decided to donate it to the Linux Foundation because they thought the Linux Foundation had the best model for open source governance. The Linux Foundation created an umbrella project called HyperLedger that was designed for to bring together all different blockchain, or as I said, you might want to call it DLT technologies. And 3 different companies donated blockchain code, and everything was in incubation. So IBM did Fabric, which is designed to do private permission blockchain, which is perfect for the legal industry. There's Aroha, which is for mobile, so it's interesting, but even I haven't played too much with it. And there's a third one that's interesting. Intel came up with a way of using their proprietary hardware to kind of simulate Ethereum mining, so it's much more efficient and faster, and that's called Sawtooth. Sawtooth is up and coming, so I might have actually considered Sawtooth if I were to create the Integra ledger today, but that's a whole other thing. But significantly, Fabric was the closest to going live, and it did. They're actually in version 1.1 now, and Sawtooth actually made it out of incubation. So IBM, I'm not going to, I'm tired of bashing IBM. IBM created an enterprise-grade cloud-based version of HyperLedger Fabric. So they're no longer responsible for Fabric itself, although they help contribute. Fabric is now an open source project being worked on by thousands of developers. It's very good. We're using it as there's still, it has issues like everything else. So right now we think it, well, up until August 7th, I thought it was by far the best way. We're looking seriously into, well, later today, I think, talk more in detail about it. Get some Ethereum code running so you can just route from one to the other depending on the use case, and with headers and some cool stuff. But again, in the same way that Bitcoin does not equal blockchain, legal tech, legal blockchain does not necessarily just mean smart contract. There's a whole lot more to it, and HyperLedger Fabric does not necessarily equal IBM. So that's kind of my rambling thought there. Any other questions?
Let me bring you the mic. Let me bring you the mic. Thank you.
You've been kind of qualitatively comparing the capabilities of different blockchains in terms of what the goals are. Is there actually a requirements document or a set of those goals, like, or has it been more of a subjective assessment?
Well, you know, I reference this. I created a white paper close to a year ago, and it's been out there. And you know, honestly, most of the discussions I've had is with blockchain technologists from various groups, and I had really hoped that the technical committee would get to meet sooner, and we're really meeting for the first time this week. And one of the goals will be to gather the thoughts, so it's not just me pontificating, that it's really organized stuff. As a matter of fact, one of the joining members suggested that their POC be, you know, a consolidation of some of stuff like Swagger and other more Swagger and other documentation that was a little bit more formal than my having coffee with someone. So we're working on it, and I would love anyone's feedback.
So is the HyperLedger decision cast in stone at this point, or not?
Oh no. No, as a matter of fact, I literally on the plane was standing up an Azure proof of authority parity network. No, what I think is pretty much, nothing's in stone. I would be willing to bet my house based upon all of the feedback I've gotten that people really like the idea of setting the standards on the API, the interface, and keeping the blockchain open and not marrying too much. It's kind of like, writing in vanilla SQL when you're dealing with databases. Sure, Oracle has some great extensions and Microsoft has their great extensions, but if you deal in vanilla generic SQL, you'll be able to swap what's going on there, and I kind of feel it's the same sort of thing that no blockchain has won. I've seen some good arguments that if Buterin pulls off what he's claiming that they're getting with the side chains, with sharding and the other stuff going on in Ethereum, that they'll dominate. So I'm taking a guess there, but like I said, I've thought HashCraf was really cool from the day I saw it, and I'm seeing another DLT every other day that's claiming incredible transaction rates. So to get a little bit more technical, one of the things we did was say our foundational services would focus on identities, which are unique identifier strings. That would be very easy to move from one system to the other. And document hashes, again, these are unique strings. So nothing's tying us to a particular database other than the fact that the timestamps are recorded when the ledger actually recorded the data. And this is something I really want the consortium to come together and set a standard for. You would be able to move the data in the Integra ledger in a second to another thing. I just need agreement on whose keys are to be trusted. What's the key requirement to basically sign off on saying, yeah, we've wiped out the original timestamps, but here's a record of what the original timestamps are, and the Integra or whatever parties are involved in doing it, that can be trusted that these were really reset if the ledger were moved. So that's the type of thing I would like to see technologists in the Global Legal Blockchain Consortium come together and discuss.
And maybe I could just mention there, especially with the increase in participation in the GLBC over the last month or two, we'd really like to invite participating organizations to contribute personnel to the technical advisory board that David has referred to. So there's plenty of opportunity for you and your colleagues to get involved, and this is a member-led organization. So you can shoot us an email at info@legalconsortium.org if you want to volunteer yourself, or even better, volunteer a colleague. Okay, other questions? Somebody want to pick a fight, or? No?
Another easy question. What are some of the other committees that make up the GLBC, other than the technical advisory
Jay
committee?
Can answer that. Jay's responsible for that.
The only other committee that's been formally established by the board at this point is a policy committee, which will govern membership participation and governance and other, policy-related issues, antitrust policies and things like that. What we're expecting will happen is then down the road, additional committees will be formed, but also, and we're happy to hear ideas about committees that you think should be formed. And then also there'll be communities of interest, sort of like ILTA has had over the years, so that maybe there'll be a big firm community of interest and a small firm community of interest and a big legal department, in-house legal department committee, and so on. So we're very happy to have ideas about that. Kim? Oh, sorry, yes. I don't know if anyone in the room is from a law school or other academic institution, but great. Yeah, we're just kicking off an academic alliance. We have, 6 or 8 law schools that have signed up to participate in the GLBC, and more that are in line to do that over the next month or two. So that's another community of interest or organization that we'll be building up underneath the GLBC. Thank you, Kim.
Jay, I'll make a request. I would love, I keep on getting the question about liability. With if an organization, you have an American Express or an AIG running a node, are they liable for the data? Are they liable for a mistake, something I did wrong? So I would love to see a committee because, with the legal brain power behind the consortium members, I would love a good opinion on, I'd love an answer to that coming out of a committee.
I thought for a minute you were going to make me give legal advice right here in the middle of the presentation. I used to be at Davis Wright Tremaine law firm and finished up my time there as chief innovation partner, and I'm trying to do things other than give legal advice these days. Did you have a question? Someone over here? Here. Thank you.
Yeah, my question comes from somebody who's new to the API, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, you've mentioned the API a little bit in your introductory remarks. I'm wondering if you can talk about, just delve a little bit deeper into how it works and some of the core methods and properties that either are already built in or are anticipated to be a part of the API?
Sure. A good friend of mine who took over as CTO at a company I used to be at really lectured me on setting the API and not changing it. The first thing, David Fisher, our CEO, had been working on this issue for a couple of years before I joined the company. I had met him 5 years ago at Startup Weekend in Las Vegas, but he really boils a lot of what's going on down to being a data reconciliation issue. So the original concept that he explained to me was he wanted a common ID system. He called them legal matter IDs, LMAT IDs, and the original base use case he was talking about is if he said basically every legal interaction, there's a matter involved. Everything has a legal context, and you had this world where if you and I were doing a contract together, we would each have our own law firms, and one law firm might be using like Clio to manage the matter. So my law firm would create a matter with a Clio matter ID, and your law firm might be using Rocket, and they would create it. And the original API we were talking about is just issuing an ID, so that's why I call it foreign key as a service, so that both sides would import our foreign key and use it anytime you had data translation. And we've really kind of have realized that this is a very powerful thing, and have really focused on having a single source of truth. And there's a lot of talk on blockchain. So one problem with blockchain, and this will relate to the second API call. So the first API call is just you're literally getting an ID. So it's a globally unique identifier generated server side that's recorded on the blockchain and delivered back to everyone. So one of the big questions I was getting a lot and learning a lot about, and is a big thing, is, well, what data do you put? Do I put documents? Do I encrypt data? And so it turns out I live 10 minutes from the David Hoosby, who is the HyperLedger security maven, so the head of security at HyperLedger. And we go out, we have lunch or drinks once a month, and he really pounded into me the fact that the commercially available encryption probably has about a 1-year shelf life. It really depends on who you speak with and your opinions on when quantum computing will come. So standard encryption, well, certainly when he gets specific, he talks about with the key lengths being used. So he basically has lectured me, don't put anything that's important or valuable on the blockchain, which is a little bit weird. But hashes, digital fingerprints, are important to understand. They're used not only to stitch blockchains together, but you can hash data and storing it on. They're one-way functions that basically, if you can take anything digital, whether it's a PDF file, the Library of Congress, anything that has a digital representation, you can create a fingerprint. There's no known way of going backward, even with a quantum computer. The NSA is unlikely to be able to crack a hash as long as the data is random enough. There are issues with hashing Social Security numbers, for example, because there are few enough of them you could go backwards. But anyway, so the number 2 foundational API is about what we call proof of existence. So if you and I were doing our contract and we drew up a PDF and we decided to each sign it, you could take the PDF, create the hash of it, and you would get like a 30-character string. That gets registered on the Integra ledger. Now, our law firms or us personally, we're still responsible for keeping that PDF, locking it away, putting it on net documents or Box just join the consortium. So we'll put it on Box, put it somewhere safe. And if I basically went to you and claimed I have a copy of the contract you signed and it claims you're giving me $1 million, and you tell me that's not what we signed, we can't yet practically look to the blockchain and go, here's the contract on the blockchain. That's what it was memorialized. We could go look. If I take this PDF and hash it and take the hash, you can notice the hash is on the blockchain. And since that has been signed off on by the nodes of the blockchain, the consortium members running the nodes, you have provenance that cannot get cracked. So foundational, first block, the identity, foundational service 2, getting a document or taking data and recording it, usually document hashes. Foundational service 3, we decided to flip things on its side. So there's so much talk about putting data and encrypting the data. Well, we realized that sometimes it's when you want data to be public. So there's a whole, we could talk on and on about encrypting email and the most horrendous thing I've seen so far in dealing with legal is the percentage of time that lawyers are sending non-password protected PDFs out over unencrypted email with sensitive information, and worst case accidentally hitting reply to all with sensitive data. And it's insane that there's good technology out there to do the encryption. It's insane no one's chosen, but there's a fear of being the first mover and making a technology spend. And there are good open source solutions, but there are many problems out there. So what I'm hoping is that the consortium will come together and give the thumbs up on some of the solutions, whether they're third-party commercial solutions that integrate or that use something like PGP. And PGP there are lots of problems with PGP. It's free, it's been around for a while, but one of the problems is there's a key management nightmare. Well, I sat there going, well, we're lucky. Anyone who is willing to commit to blockchain, their company is committing to a key management nightmare. So I'm just going to coast in behind that and go, if you're willing to talk about blockchain at all, managing your PGP keys is not a problem. Another thing, again, I have friends who know the security much better than me, but they've validated my, I thought might be a naive assumption that, look, if you're doing you have to look up someone's public key. So in general, people are looking them up on key servers, like MIT has a key server, PGP has one, and you have to look up someone's public key, and people go, well, man in the middle attack, someone can get in the middle and hack it. Well, if I'm discussing with a technologist, I may just use a known server. It's HTTPS protected. No one's going to do a man in the middle, but the CIOs, for some reason, there is an issue convincing people. So certainly some of the decision makers in legal. And I realized, gee, again, if you were willing to trust and use the Integra ledger, use a legal blockchain, you have the ledger already either running behind your firewall. Some people we've dealt with absolutely insist it has to be behind their firewall. So if someone needs to do a PGP key lookup, there'll be no man-in-the-middle attack. It's safe behind their firewall. And then the other half of the people I run into told me that they'd never run third-party code within their firewall. But if at least it's running on Amazon or AWS or Azure or something, they've established a trusted connection. So number 3 is a key registry. Now, this is my theory on it, and we've played around with some stuff with Microsoft Word and stuff. Net Documents will actually, instead of talking about it, went ahead and used the Integra ledger, and will actually be demoing using the Integra ledger as part of a solution for the public key registry. So those 3 are the focus. We have an API document. If you get an email to me, dberger@integraledger.com, or anyone from Integra, I'll send out the API. It's right now, somewhere down the line, we'll probably be charging a penny a write to the ledger, so a trivial amount. But for the time being, I'll just send you an OAuth key. So any developer can just, with a REST, any tool, you can go into Postman, which is my tool of choice, and in 5 minutes be playing around. But those are the 3 main things, and then you can not only read data, but you can verify and write data back. So there were 2 lookups. So 5 API calls right now. We said?
Other questions before we wrap up? One last question. You get the last word.
I just wanted to know a little bit of information about the nodes. How many nodes on the Integra ledger? Who are the nodes? And does it take all of them to approve it to get it up to? Or is it a certain percentage?
That's a great question. So I expect it. So right now, we invite any member to spin up a node, and we're using the IBM blockchain as a platform, and it costs like $1,000 a month to get an account. And we thought that we would have 2 dozen people stand up. To date, we've been asked about it, but to date, every developer who was interested in playing with it, when I gave them the API, said, well, just use the API for now. So we were going to, so it's in flux. We would love to see about 20 members, and it's just really a matter of who's going to bear the cost of doing it. But if someone wanted a node right now that was a consortium member, all they have to do is sign up for a blockchain platform account, and then so Integra runs the certificate authority, because that's actually HyperLedger best practice for consortium. So there's really only a couple of nodes up on the IBM blockchain platform under control. One of the things that's annoyed me about IBM is they've been promising for 6 months various deployments where you could run off-premise. So they promised 6 months ago there should have been a Docker image that I could have given to anyone, and they could have connected. And they said, oh, we can't make enough money. So that's under flux a little bit. One of the advantages of HyperLedger is that you, because it's a trusted group running the nodes, the consensus can be a lot more flexible. So they've separated the consensus from ordering. So that's one of the big things. Well, not IBM, HyperLedger has. So one of their big claims is that everything is pluggable, and by separating them, you can be much more flexible about the rules of ordering. So you can basically control the consensus mechanism. So it's my claim that by keeping with the brutally simple API and the particular data I chose, you can self-sign most of what's going on. That's how you can pick up a lot of speed. So for at least the foundational services I set, I'm suggesting, right now I'm just having a single peer validate. I'm suggesting that that's good enough for this, but that's up to the consortium. Lastly, as I mentioned, we think that proof of authority, Ethereum stuff that Microsoft is introducing, is ready for prime time. That goes even further, basically saying, look, the members absolutely trust it. In order to get that to work, we would really recommend that the nodes be run by known and named large entities. And one of the things in the Ethereum proof of authority is you can delegate the authority to everyone. So basically, we'll invite every member to have the ability to run a node if they want, but we imagine that the majority will delegate the authority, and I think we need 12 to 20 nodes running.
Okay, thank you very much.